Welcome back to the Make Room Show. I'm so happy you're here with us today. If you happen to listen to episode 194, my guest on that episode was Logan Barone, and the episode was so amazing that I had to have him back on the show. So today, please welcome my guest back to the show. Welcome, Logan.
Jennifer, thanks for having me back. I'm excited for this conversation.
I'm so excited. I feel like I learned so much from you in the last episode. I know the audience did too, but I also wanted to have you back on because I felt like we stopped recording and the conversation continued on. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish my audience heard this. So
Yeah.
we talked about having you come back after the new year, and here we are. I feel like it was a blink. It's like goes by so fast.
Yes, it always does.
So if you didn't listen to that episode, please make sure you go back and listen to 194. The actual title of that was Discovering the Divine Within Through Meditation. And Logan is a spiritual coach. He's extremely wise. He's the author of The Mystery in You. And I just could not be more excited to talk to you. So let's get into it. It's a brand new year. And I know for me, the beginning of a new year just feels so good. It feels like possibilities are endless, that anything can happen, and it really does excite me. And it's one of the things that I feel like I've been thinking a lot about, and I wanted to start off the conversation with this, Logan, is I've been thinking a lot about more of like living from being, not doing. And for someone like me who has been an entrepreneur for over 2 decades, I'm a type A personality. I like everything in order and organized. I feel like I never realized how much I focused on doing. And the last few weeks to maybe month, I've been like, you know what? Who cares about this list of things to do this new year? I'm focusing on who I want to be at the end of this year. So when,
Yeah.
it kind of goes along with who do I want to become? And that looks like new habits I want to form, new levels in business, new ways to evolve as a human being. And what does that look like on a daily basis? And it has less to do with tasks and more to do with checking in with myself, if that makes sense. I feel like looking around my environment, looking around my life, even my clothes, everything, and saying, does this align with the person I'm working on becoming? So I was kind of wanting to start there and have you explain to us, because I know that you have thought about this as well. What does this type of lifestyle look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. I think it's a profound shift in perspective because I think for most of us, we grow up with this kind of egoic mentality that says we have to do in order to be or do in order to become. Right. And so we grew up with this. It's part of our programming. Everyone else around us is saying things like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And there's like this comparison game going on. We're comparing ourselves with other people. That starts at a very early age. And so this mentality, especially if we experience a lot of that in the first 7 years of our lives, what that ends up doing is it like heavily programs, conditions our subconscious mind. And then after the age of seven, the subconscious mind controls our lives 95% of the time after the age of 7 or 8. And so it just becomes this programming. And I know I keep saying that, but that's what it is. And we have these like expectations and all these things that we put on ourselves, and the comparison thing just sticks with us, and we keep trying to climb this ladder. And if you really want to, I guess, go to the core of that programming, the core of it is this fundamental belief of not being enough and thinking that in our doing or in our not doing, because I know for me, like being brought up in religion, it was all about like, not sinning. and being
Mhm.
this perfect little angel. And if you do that, if you live like that, then you'll be accepted, then you'll be loved, and you'll be enough. So the profound shift that I was talking about is going from that mentality, the egoic programming, doing to be, to this liberated true self mentality, which is once we know who we really are and we awaken to our being, then from our being, we do. And so it's not that we're like, getting rid of action and taking charge and responsibility. We're just shifting the perspective on where that comes in the journey. It actually comes after we recognize who we are and we start to live from our true identity. Then it just flows. But we know that our actions and what we're doing and all of our goals and all of that stuff is not like contingent on our being. Our being just is. And what you'll notice is, like I was saying before we started this, what you'll notice is when you start to live from being, when you start to rest from your being, all of a sudden, this river of life will just start to pour out of you. And if you want to know, like, one of the main secrets to avoiding burnout, it's this profound shift of mindset that we're talking about right here, right now. Because when you start to just be, this river of life is now running your life, you're surrendering to the flow. And then all of a sudden, when you least expect it, you just start to produce all this fruit naturally and effortlessly. And it's really an incredible thing. But, for myself, I can look back on my own life and I can see the times where I was falling into that mentality of doing to be. And for me, what I noticed was the main thing that kept me trapped in that cycle was my own self judgment. And the self judgment was really coming from the egoic programming, which, by the way, I used to look at the egoic programming as something that was bad. I used to judge it as something that was bad. But now I'm seeing it as training wheels for my spiritual journey. I had to go through that. I had to experience that in order to transcend it, in order to actually awaken. That was part of the game. That was part of the play. And so what I noticed for myself was when I would judge the parts of myself that I didn't like, that came with rejection, that came with shame, that came with guilt, that came with fear, the more I would judge those parts of myself, the more I would keep attracting these situations and circumstances and relationships into my life that reflected that, the negative stuff, the disempowering stuff. So for me, it was a matter of understanding what judgment really is and then going from there. And something else I mentioned before we started this conversation is I think for me and my journey, what it appears to be is that my lesson to be learned is the transcendence of judgment. Um,
Mm.
yeah. And the way I'm starting to navigate that is through the opposite of judgment. See, I personally believe that the opposite of judgment is unconditional love. I used to think that the opposite of unconditional love was fear, but now I'm thinking that it's judgment.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. And the first thing that sticks out to me is the fact that you said doing to be versus being to do. And it hits me because I'm constantly working with people that are wanting to create a plan of things to do in order to become whoever, right? It could
Yeah,
be a business owner, it could be an organized person, it could be an author. But the thing about it is, it's funny that your whole life people say, what do you want to be when you grow up? They don't say, who do you want to be?
right.
And so we feel like when we get this title of the what, right? Like, okay, we're a lawyer. Okay, we're a doctor. Okay, we're a teacher. It's like then we've made it, right? we figured it out. We have that title. We know what to say at a cocktail party when people say, "What do you do for a living?" But how many of us as adults are spending time really figuring out who we are, which is difficult when you're busy, 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 right? When your time is
Yeah.
filled up, your calendar is filled up, you don't even have the time to contemplate who you are, let
Yeah.
alone who you are now and who you want to become in the future. Because I think that's the fun game of it, right?
Yeah.
Evolving and constantly
Yeah.
become a better version of ourselves. That's exciting to me. That like makes life exciting. So I find this interesting that the more you are in your being, that dictates what you should do, because it's almost like that when we're in our being, that's when we get the downloads, that's when we get the whispers, that's when we get the aha moments, the clarity, where we're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I never had that
Yeah.
idea before. Like it can just be you're going through your normal morning routine and you're not really putting much emphasis on it. And all of a sudden you get this has happened to me so many times. It's like when I spend time in the being, I'll get this bright idea that blows me away. And
Yeah.
so that is really where the answers are. And I think a lot of people are talking about manifestation right now. And I think even in manifestation, it's like, we'll do A, B, and C, and the thing you want will be manifested. But what about just becoming the person that can actually receive the manifestation?
Yeah.
It's a completely different way of thinking. And I think that people are starting to realize it. But when I hear you talk about this, Logan, it just, the one word that sticks out to me is freedom. Like
Yeah.
not having to figure it all out, not having to have this long laundry list of to-dos. That's just, it feels like freedom.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and I think we can also like slip into this mindset of believing that all we are is a separate egoic self, which I call it the small self. And when this happens, this is typically when we fall into the mindset of do, doing to be. And with this typically comes this idea that like we have this little free will, and like every little action, every little decision that we make is like determining whether or not we experience our destiny. And so with that comes a lot of pressure, with that comes a lot of anxiety and fear. And I used to think like that. And again, for me, that was one of the main things that was preventing me from experiencing the truth of my being and manifesting from my being. I was stuck in the small self. I was stuck in the belief that my free will was dictating the course of my life. But I don't really believe that anymore. What I believe is that what I used to think was my destiny, I'm now starting to see that, my destiny is basically the free will of my higher self. Or you could say, and this is kind of, there's a level of woo to this. So I'm not saying this is dogmatically the way it is. I'm just throwing out potential, hypothetical, take it or leave it. But sometimes I like to have fun with these different ideas and play around with them. And so sometimes I think, well, what if like my soul or my higher self chose my destiny, chose this plan for me before I was born? And what determines whether or not I experience this is in my life is the degree to which I learn to get out of my own way or the ego's way. You know what I mean? So the more I get out of my own way, the more I let go, the more I forgive, the more I fall into my being. And then everything starts to play out exactly as my higher self chose it to be. And so the pressure's off of me. And you said liberation. That's exactly what it is. I'm not living in this world of fear thinking that if I make the wrong decision, I'm going to screw up the destiny of my life and my purpose and my calling. No, no, no. There's nothing that can touch that. I firmly believe that there are certain things that we have chosen to experience that we will
Mhm.
experience. The question is, how long will it take for us to experience those things? And the answer is to the degree that we're attached to living from the small self, thinking that we're limited beings, thinking that all we are is this egoic identity. And that is the very thing that blocks us from experiencing all the things that we should be experiencing. But here's the key with this, okay? The way to actually transcend into who we really are and to live from our highest potential to fulfill our destinies is to stop judging the ego. The more we judge the ego, the more we live from this place of division and separation consciousness, the more we will keep experiencing the same egoic patterns. And
Mm.
so when we accept and include the ego and we view it not as something, like I said earlier, not as something that is bad, not as something that is from the devil or whatever, but we view it as something that is helping us to awaken, something that is helping us to transcend, and we accept it, we love it, we include it, then that becomes our springboard into awakening, into living out the destiny that our higher selves have chosen for us before we even were born.
So I 100% agree that our spirit decides our kind of our purpose, our life path before we come. Tell me how you have learned to look at the ego in a positive way. Because you said it's helping us, right? Because
Yep.
when we look at it from a more of a religious perspective, a lot of times we do use the word devil, right? They're kind of
Yep.
interchangeable. It's like, oh, when we feel that self, that egotistical self of us, we're like, oh, Satan's trying to get me, Satan's trying to bring me down, not today, Satan. So explain what you mean when you're saying maybe that the ego is actually helping us on our spiritual journey.
Sure. So this life, this human experience is an experience of duality. Fundamentally, it's an experience of duality. Okay. There's light, there's darkness, there's good, there's evil, there's hot, there's cold. That's
Mhm.
just the reality that we live in. And so, how can you be found if you were never lost? That's the question. And so you can equate being found with awakening. How can you awaken if you were never asleep? See, that's part of this game. That's part of what we're experiencing. That's part of integrating the whole. The ego plays this role in our lives, it plays this role in our human experience of unconsciousness, of forgetting, so that we can remember. And
Hmm.
so when we come into this life and we start to, by the way, this is really important. We're not born with an ego. So some people would equate the ego with like the sin nature that we read about in religion, but that's not what this is. The ego is not something that we're born with. The ego is something that we develop as we age. And like I said, it typically happens in the first few years of our lives when um, when consciousness is starting to develop and there's a sense of self, there's a sense of me and not me that starts to develop. That typically happens between the ages of 2 and 3. Okay. But this is the important part. You come into this world without an ego. You're just being, you just are. You fundamentally, inherently are enough. That is your starting point. And that is true for every single human being. That is true for every soul. We all come into this earth whole, complete, and just divine, right? But what happens? We leave the garden, we forget who we really are, we leave the inherent truth of our being, and we start allowing the world and other people and circumstances and situations to determine who we are, to determine our worth. And that is what causes us to fall into the deception, the illusion of separation. And then we are basically asleep, we're unconscious, and we're on this cycle, we're on this treadmill of trying to become, trying to become, trying to become. and we look for worth and validation and all these different external things, and we never find it. That's part of the story of being asleep. That's the ego's turn to have the spotlight on the stage. But then hopefully we have this point of awakening. We see through that and we transcend that. And then, but here's the other thing, people will awaken, they'll transcend the ego, and they'll just get blissed out in this high of like oneness and love. And I am, one with the divine. And then they take it to the other extreme. But again, this world, this reality, this life is about balance. It's about integration. It's about wholeness. So the key is after our awakening, yes, like embrace that moment of, you know, recognizing your true self for the first time. It's liberating. But the key is to integrate, it's to transcend and include, to where you come back into your ego, you come back into the sense of being human, and you be fully human. You don't get all super spiritual and you forget about why you even came here in the first place. So, what
Mhm.
happens is the light of your true self, the light of your being, starts to shine through your ego, through your human experience. And that's what I believe Jesus meant when he talked about being the light of the world. After you awaken, you allow the true self within you to shine through your human vehicle. And that is how we help others awaken on the journey of life. And that's essentially what it's all about. Once you transcend the ego, you realize that it's never been just about you. The point of life is to love, it's to serve, it's to go beyond yourself and to help others. Because in helping others, you're actually helping yourself. And that is the essence of unity consciousness.
Mhm. And being that example,
Yeah.
right? Without even
Yeah.
having to say it, just
Exactly.
living it out and being one. I think the power in that is deciding, okay, now that I know who I am, I have the courage to be authentically me.
Yeah.
Because you're almost go backwards to that child, right? Before we learned about the ego, we can go back to that person that isn't so focused on what everybody wants us to do or what we think we should do or how we think we should act. And
Yeah.
I think what makes it even more complicated nowadays for young people navigating that is looking at everybody else doing it their way because it's on social media. Where
Yes.
when I was a young adult, I didn't, the only references I had were the people face to face with me. So
Yeah.
it worries me that it'll either be the best thing ever for them or it'll take them longer because they're constantly looking at other examples rather than looking inside. But I think that it's almost like once we find that freedom in who we really are, we can go back to that childlike person and just be us and like take it or leave it. Like you said before, like this is me, but we're so happy in our own skin that
Yeah.
nobody's opinion matters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that it's funny because ever since I started kind of looking at it from this point of view, the being instead of the doing, I've realized that I'm becoming happier and happier.
Yeah.
When I got stuck in the doing and like, oh, I should do this, this, and this year because of this goal. It's just so exhausting. And I'm not saying that you can just go through la 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 and not do things. It's not
Yeah.
that. But when your primary focus, like the majority of your energy, the majority of time is on the being, you start to feel happier.
Yeah.
It's almost like, and okay, let me give you a perfect example. Say, for example, you're like, I want to make X amount of dollars last year, right? And you did all the work and you worked really hard, and 2024 came to an end, and you're like, oh, I didn't reach that goal. And then you start over in 2025 and you're like, okay, start over. I'm going to give it another shot this year, right? And
Yeah.
instead of doing it the same way that you did it last year, you focused on becoming a better version of yourself, a more profound version, then at the end of the year, it's not really going to matter as much how much money you made, because you are going to have so much fun and be so happy every day of that year that that's worth more than the paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're
And then
all kind of, go ahead.
no, so and then the success and prosperity will follow you just from that.
That's the magical part right there. That
Yeah.
is the part that it's just, that's it. That's the magical part. And because we live in a world where we need to accumulate things and we think accumulation of things makes us happy, I have had an insight view more than the average person of how much stuff people have in their homes and how many things they've accumulated. And I've never walked into a home in over 20 years where somebody has said to me, I'm so happy because I own these things. I've never heard it. If
Yeah.
anything, I think the more things, the more stress, because it takes more work and responsibility to keep it going, right? And to maintain
Yeah.
that. So, and we're not saying, you know, you walk around with your Birkenstocks and become a monk and not own a thing. That's not it. But it's like living in your being can give you so much joy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah. And, I think like just about all of us can look back and see and remember like when we were kids, as you were mentioning, there was just like this innate happiness, like the simplest things brought us joy and fulfillment. We didn't need a lot. It was just like this carefree sense of awe and wonder and just like love for life. And what I actually believe is that, we keep talking about being, our true being. I think that happiness is actually like an innate byproduct of our being. I think you could say it this way too. Like, you've heard people say, like, you know, deep down, we are love. Love is not just a feeling or an emotion, it's who we are. I think you can say the same thing for happiness. So I think what happens is we fall into the pattern, the cycles of, like I've been saying, like we've been saying, not knowing who we really are, not knowing our inherent worth and value. And we try to find happiness outside of ourselves in our doing, in our accomplishments, in our achievements, in the things that we own. And it may give you like this fleeting sense of happiness, but we all know how it goes. Like, there's that ancient saying of this too shall pass. And so you have the sense, that fleeting sense of happiness, but it's passing and it will fade away eventually, just like the clouds in the sky. Everything's moving, everything's passing. And then we go on to the next thing. And like I
Yeah.
was literally just talking to someone yesterday. I was having a bad day yesterday. I just like was feeling off and I was talking to a friend about like content creation and whether it's like creating YouTube videos or podcast episodes or writing books. It's like you think, and this is just part of that old egoic programming, but like we think that the fulfillment and happiness will come from what we're creating and what we're doing. But what happens is, you're thinking, oh, if I can just get this book published and finished, then I would be happy, I would be fulfilled. And then what happens? You end up writing that book and you have that sense of joy and like fulfillment when it comes out, and maybe it lasts for a few weeks or a few months. But then what happens? Well, it kind of goes away. Book sales start going down. People are asking about your next. It's always the next. It's always more. And
Yeah.
that's one of the main aspects of the ego, is it's never like truly content. But again,
That is life.
go exactly. But going back to the true self, our being, the happiness is always there. And so like there's all these like ancient profound quotes from different like mystics and teachers, and Rumi, who was a Sufi mystic, a poet, he said, "You are what you seek." And then Saint Francis of Assisi, who I have up here on my wall, he said, "What we are looking for is what is looking." So these are deep, profound, mystical sayings, but when you really contemplate the message of these sayings and you see it like universally across different traditions, it's pretty fascinating that, men and women have been realizing this for thousands of years. And you're right. The less we have, there is this sense of like less pressure and more liberation that comes with that. Um, and then the other thing too is it's like if you're relying on happiness, your fulfillment from like the opinions of other people, you're going to be stuck in a pretty deep hole because the interesting thing about that is if you're trying to seek external validation in relationships and people, is you're never going to get it. Or at least you're never going to get it to the degree that you're looking for, where you feel that ultimate sense of fulfillment. Because the thing is, you know, we tend to think that like everyone is thinking about us all the time, especially like in public spaces. We think that everyone's like looking at us and thinking about us and judging us. But the reality of it is, most people are only thinking about themselves like 99% of the time. Everyone is thinking about themselves. So when you understand that, it's liberating because you're like, wait, like no one's actually thinking about me and judging me and criticizing me as much as I think they are. They're thinking about themselves. I'm thinking about myself. They're thinking about themselves. What does that do? That frees you up to be yourself and to not care what people think about you. And that's where authenticity starts to thrive and flourish. And you return to that childlike essence of just being and following your passions in life and just like being in love with life and just not caring what people think. I mean, it's simple, but at the same time, it's immensely profound.
So true. I was actually thinking about this recently. It was I remember like when I started doing a lot of content creation when my first books came out and at the beginning of, when this was all starting. It's like, oh, I can't go online if I don't have hair and makeup and I need to, have the right thing rehearsed to say. And I think it's been liberating to watch a lot of people just become more their real self. Like I think it's more interesting to watch somebody that might have hair and makeup done one day, but then they're up another day where they woke up and they're in bed and they're just like their natural self. And
Yeah.
I woke up last weekend and I just had this urge to like shed all the clothes that I didn't want to represent me this year. And it was just like, I woke up and it was, it's a spiritual thing. It's like, I got to do it now. And it was fun. Like I didn't think of it as a chore. It was like I could pick up a piece of clothing and just be like, feel the energy off of it, of like a definitive yes or no. That was it. And so I decided, I was like, I need to jump on Instagram and film this because I'm sure it would help other people to decide on their clothes based on this. I had just got done working out. I had like a sweatsuit on, my hair in a bun, and zero makeup. I think I had glasses on, and I was like, who really gives a shit, right? Who gives a shit? And so the point of it is that if you're feeling like this is something you're doing in life and it goes along with your platform and it can help somebody, you can actually serve in the moment, then that's the authentic part. You can't wait until I couldn't wait 4 hours later when I was showered and ready. And, it wasn't going to be as authentic. And I think that when you are focused on being, you're more willing to do that, right? And
Yeah.
one thing that you said about people think of themselves more than others, I've realized that a while ago. So even if you go back and like nitpick a piece of content and think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that or done that, everyone's moved on with their life. Nobody cares, right?
Exactly.
Nobody cares. And so I always love the saying, good enough is the new perfect, because it's like, just get it
Yeah.
done. Just put the content out there. It doesn't have to be perfect. You have a million other chances coming up in the future. I think people appreciate the rawness more than the polished these days. I really do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's
It's,
something that I've experienced in my own journey with content creation. And, I started out like super serious and I thought I had to have all these scripts and I had to have everything planned out on what I was going to say. But that just became too much and I got burnt out. And then I had this realization of, hey, you know what? Whatever I'm supposed to be saying, whatever I'm supposed to be publishing or posting, it's got to come from my soul. It's got to come from authenticity. And so
Mhm.
then I just started like making videos, and the same goes for writing, where I would purposely go into it with like no agenda and no title or no idea of what I was going to say or write. But I would almost like get into this meditative state. And from this place of being, from this place of flow, the flow state, I would sit back, me, like my true self, would sit back and just be in amazement at the stuff that was just coming out of me. And I knew that it wasn't my ego, it wasn't my small self, it was my true self, it was my higher self that I was allowing to flow through me. And what do you
Yeah.
know? Each time I would do this, and post it. A lot of times, like my egoic critical self would like judge it and, like you were saying, like nitpick and say, oh, you need to cut this out and you pronounce this word wrong and someone's going to make fun of you, blah, blah, blah. But I got past that and I would just go ahead and post it. And then I found that those videos were the videos that were speaking to people the most. And so many times I would read in the comment section, someone would say something like, you have no idea how, like, the words that you just said, the way you
Mhm.
said them were the exact words
Yeah.
that I needed to hear.
Mhm.
Um, and then yeah, so that's been my go-to method for a while now, and it is
Yeah.
super liberating and it's fun, you know.
It is fun. And I believe that if if I have this urge to share a message in the moment, I believe that our spirits are all connected enough to know that my spirit's smart enough to say, this is something you have to put out there and you're the one to do it. You're the one to deliver the content right now. And I feel like that's why people end up saying, this is what I needed to hear today. And
Exactly.
I think it's super important too to let people know that you did that for them. Like I had a friend post something on Facebook a couple days ago, a friend of mine in Florida, and it was like just the exact thing I needed to hear in the morning. And she ended up like mistakenly calling me 2 hours later, like in a butt dial situation. And I was like, okay, this is all meant to be. I wanted to tell you that your post this morning really was exactly what I needed to hear. I think the more you tell people that when it happens to you, the more you're being kind of like you're the permission slip to them to be more authentic. If we could
Yeah.
all do that, it would be amazing to encourage each other to be more authentic. One of the things I want to ask you about, Logan, is when you know, right, when you're doing the work and you're focusing on your true authentic self, and you can almost in your spirit feel that there's a block based on a certain topic in your life or situation in your life that you're trying to move past, and you're like, I know there's a block there, right? You know the block is there. What kind of advice do you have for us to move past the block or realize what the block is or eliminate the block?
Yeah, great question. For me, I've noticed that the blocks typically are very similar. So it's patterns. And so the first step is recognizing the pattern. For example, let's say I'm, working on my next book right now and I'm writing and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden it just comes to a halt and nothing's flowing. The ideas go out the window. And I sit there and I really try to come up with the next line, the next paragraph, and it's just not coming. What I notice is when I fall into when it comes to a halt, when it stops, and then I fall into the mentality of trying and doing and figuring it all out and making it happen, then that doesn't work. Then that's when the judge comes out and I start judging myself and these old thoughts of, like you're not, maybe you were never supposed to write, or maybe, you're forcing this and you need to go find something else, because And this is the lie that I believe and I judge myself for. But it's like, if you were really supposed to be doing this, you would never have any problems. You would be perfect. So it's that subtle, like, call it a spirit, whatever you want,
Yeah.
that subtle spirit of perfectionism, that
Yeah.
inner critic will just arise. And so then I face that. And sometimes I face it well. Sometimes I see it for what it is and I move past it simply by highlighting the lie and then stepping away, taking a break, getting my mind off of it. And then, you know what? I come back the next day, I'm fresh, and it's like I'm fine and I can get back into it. Um, but yeah, I think, like I was saying, it's the sequence of recognizing it for what it is, highlighting the pattern, and then what I keep going back to. It's letting go of judgment, accepting it. And you can almost see it as, what? Maybe this blockage, this interruption that I'm experiencing, maybe this was something that I chose to experience. And maybe this is like, the question is, it's all about perception. The question is, what is this telling me? What is this teaching me? Maybe I've been putting way too much time and energy into this, and maybe my soul needs a break. Maybe I need to rest. It's just a question to ask yourself, And so I think a change in perspective is the first thing, and then the worst thing we can do is judge it, because, like I keep saying, the more we judge it, the more we judge ourselves, the more we keep attracting those experiences into our lives. So that's what has helped me. And then I think that just I actually I told this to someone a few days ago and it keeps coming up, but like I think that the key to so much of the spiritual growth that we experience in our lives boils down to self-compassion, which I think is like a forgotten element of spirituality and just life in general. It's like we don't have much self-compassion. It's easy for us to like have compassion for others. Like, think about it, like when someone's having a rough day and they're like coming up with all these things about themselves that aren't true. It's easy for us to sit with them and to say, you know what, like that's not who you really are. Like that's a lie you're believing. It's easy for us to identify and highlight that from the outside in. But when we're the ones that are facing some kind of inner critic and we're believing these lies of not being enough and not being worthy and all this, like, it's for whatever reason, it's hard for us to have compassion for ourselves. But I think that's the missing key. I think if we can start to meditate more on self compassion and embody and express that, we will, like I said, experience a tremendous amount of growth and liberation in our lives.
Yeah, I think too, if you think about like your friends having a bad day and you feel compassion for them, you don't think to yourself, well, they did it to themselves. What would they do wrong? They should have done this better,
Yeah.
all of the things. But to ourselves, we sure do. We're like,
Yeah.
well, we're having a bad day because we made this mistake, or this didn't go our way. What did we do to create that? And what did we do wrong? And we're just so judgmental, like you keep using the word judgmental or judging. It's like that's what it is. Like we feel like we did something to create the bad day, or we
Yeah.
should get over something that happened to us. Like we should be able to move on quicker, right? Or if somebody,
Yeah.
even if somebody does something awful to us, it's like, well, I should be able to forgive quicker. I mean, there's just so many should haves, could haves, would haves. But when you look at a friend, you just are like, oh, I hate that you're having a bad day. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Totally opposite.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the things too that I wanted to ask you, or just to kind of have a quick conversation about, is when we were talking about, this, when we were going back to like manifesting and just that
Mm.
part of the conversation. I think one thing that has been interesting to me is contemplating that when we manifest, we think that we want to manifest this thing, right? Like, say, it's a specific item
Okay.
because we think that item or that experience is going to make us feel this thing.
Yeah.
But what about just we want to feel this thing. We don't care how it comes. We don't care. We really want the feeling.
Yeah.
So if we let go of what kind of box it comes in, right? Like think about it like Amazon shipping you this package, and when you open up, you're going to feel freedom, right? Because that's why if you think about manifesting money, a lot of people, what is the feeling behind it? It's freedom, right?
Yeah.
So if you're waiting for this Amazon package to come and you're going to open it up and you're going to feel freedom, well, your brain automatically thinks, well, freedom looks like a big fat checkbook or this kind of job or this book deal or this podcast recognition, all these things. But if you're just like, I have no freaking idea what's in the Amazon box, I just want to feel freedom,
Yeah.
then we can let the universe figure it out. We can let God figure out what he's going to put in the box. And I
Yeah.
think that has been a huge aha for me, because when you are in a position like we are, where we work for ourselves and we're entrepreneurs and we're creators, and it's like you're so used to thinking, I have to figure out what is the next thing, right? Whether what's the next book title or what's the next piece of content or what's the next episode I'm going to publish. And it's like, but really, I don't care if it was like a miniature purple dinosaur. If it's going to give me the freedom I want, I don't care what it is. I mean, when you really
Right.
break it down, do we really care? Do we really
Right.
care? I mean, so that to me is a big key of manifestation, is stop trying to like have all of the things figured out and then waiting for that specific thing to come, because a lot of times it doesn't come the way we think it's going to come. So just being open to the possibilities and open to new outcomes that I can't even imagine. And I do believe in my core that God's plan is going to be better than my own plan.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a few things in my life that I know to be true from direct experience. And I always tell people that, like, one of those things is the process of manifestation. I feel like I've been manifesting since as long as I can remember, before I even knew what it was. Because I can look back on my own life and I can see these times where I was just like embracing the feeling, not caring how and when the thing that I was wanting to experience would come into my life. I was just like being that version of myself that I wanted to be in the future. And then it would happen. And it, like you said, it would always be greater and better than my ego was anticipating. So this goes back to being. We're going back to being. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are being. That right there, that line is the essence of true manifestation. So be the version of yourself that you want to be in the future. How do you do that? Well, that's the missing part that often gets left out, because I've heard people say a lot, they say in the manifestation community, they say, act as if or assume that whatever it is you're wanting to experience is already done and live from that assumption. Well, that's true to a degree, but the missing part, the most important part, is you're not just assuming that whatever it is you're wanting to experience is already done. You're assuming the feeling of it. That's the key. Feeling is the secret. As Neville Goddard wrote a book called Feeling is the Secret. Because for a lot of people, they'd say, well, wait, like, how can I assume this is already done? Because maybe it's something that I've never experienced before. I want to have this particular job, but I've never had this job. So how can I like assume and live from that reality if I've never experienced it? Well, like you highlighted, which is very important, the key is the feeling. What we really want is the feeling.
Mhm.
So what it feels like to be joyful. You know what it feels like to be happy and fulfilled and liberated. So you start to choose those elevated emotions. You start to embody those elevated emotions. And when you do that, your vibrational frequency will naturally rise. And now all of a sudden, you're becoming more magnetic. And these things that are in alignment energetically with your vibrational frequency will just start to flow into your life. So this conversation is a full circle because it's leading us back to the very beginning of being versus doing. a lot of people are trying to manifest. They're trying to really apply all these different methods and techniques, and they're so focused on manifesting and creating.
Yeah.
And typically, those are the people that are experiencing the most resistance around creating and manifesting whatever it is they're trying to create and manifest. So it's not that at all. It's the opposite actually, which confuses the ego because the ego has the mentality of I'm the one that's doing all of this. I'm the one that's creating, and the more I put my energy and effort into it, the more likely I'll manifest. And that's just not how it works. We get out of our own way, we let go, we surrender to the flow and out of our being. And like the other great point we brought up too, the happiness um is innate to our being, and all these emotions that we're wanting to feel are actually already within us. It's who we are. So we focus on that. We be the version of ourselves. We allow these elevated emotions to be the dominant force within us, and everything else will play out. And like you said, it will be better than we expected. I believe that.
Yeah, I do too. I just think of like all the different times in business that I hit like a milestone, and I know it was from that high energy level of being my true authentic self. And, I even think back on the very first book I wrote, and it was one of the best-selling books I've ever written. And I didn't have like all these expectations like I did after I had signed like the fifth contract, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I literally had no idea what I was doing when I wrote my first book. I just poured out what I thought the world needed, and I didn't even have a deal. So I
Yeah.
had no pressure on myself. And then as it went, it's like, okay, now I have to, set the bar higher. And I knew too much. It kind of
Yeah.
is interesting, but I didn't think writing a first book would even lead to a fifth or sixth book. It wasn't even part of the plan. So there's an example of it became better than what I thought, but not so. I think the longer you're in something, sometimes the more pressure you build into yourself, and then you set the bar higher and higher, and you have less fun. And when you're not having fun, you don't have the high energy, you don't have the creativity. And so I bet you there's so many people out there, like even if it was music or any kind of type of creativity, when they were having the most fun just doing it, they were the most successful.
Yeah. Because
So,
that's what people don't understand. It's like, what we're thinking, what we're perceiving to be as our outer world is just a reflection of our inner world, our inner state of being.
mhm, yeah.
So if you want to change your external experience, you start with your inner experience. You start with your inner state of being. And then it's the mirror principle. Everything else will reflect and play out. And it may take time. But that's what the journey is all about. It's about taking it step by step. It's about having patience. It's about having self compassion and just allowing and surrendering. And so, like, going back to my belief, my perspective of this earth is a school and we're going through different curriculums, if you keep experiencing resistance and blockages and things not happening, and you're working and you're striving and it's not working out, what's the lesson to be learned in that? Well, what's the opposite of that? You always ask the question, what is the opposite? If you're experiencing, for example, a tremendous amount of conditional love in your life, in relationships, what's the opposite of conditional love? It's unconditional love. So you're actually learning unconditional love through the opposite. And so going to this whole mindset of striving and I'm working and I'm really focused on trying to make this happen and it's not happening. What's the lesson to be learned? What's the opposite? It's surrender. The lesson to be learned there is surrender, because the more you surrender, the more you let go, the more you see that it's all going to work out, and it has nothing to
Mhm.
do with your egoic control. So trust the flow. That's the lesson to be learned there.
Trust the flow.
Yeah.
That's so good. So good. And not and just to wrap it up, not to judge ourselves by
Yeah.
how the ego is showing up. We didn't even
Yeah.
ask for that ego. So we
Yeah.
can, I mean, like I loved when you said the ego is here to teach us. And I think if we can look at it that way, I feel like we would judge ourselves less. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's all working in our favor.
Yeah. And then it's just like, if you, and again, I'm not saying this is exactly what it is, but it's fun to just play around with these ideas. If you just thought that, you know what, everything I'm experiencing is something that I chose to experience for my own greater good and transcendence, it would completely
Mhm.
change your perspective of everything you're going through, whether it's positive or negative. And so all of a sudden you would transcend the judgment of, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is positive, this is negative that I'm experiencing in my life, and you would view it all as, like you said, a learning experience that is going to enable me to transcend these different dualities, and it's going to enable me to fall back and rest into my being, where true liberation is. Liberation is not found in the world of duality. It's found in the transcendence of that world, of that matrix. And it's not something that we're attaining, it's not something that we're earning. It's something that we're remembering, because again, we start out with this essence of pure beingness. And so that's why the spiritual
Yeah.
journey is actually, it's a spiral, or it's actually a circle. It's not a ladder. It's not a mountain. The ego
Yeah.
wants it to be some kind of like, some kind of mountain climb, and we have to reach this spiritual status. Uh, I think it was Alan Watts. He said one time, like, the only Zen you find on top of the mountain is the Zen that you bring up there. So you've always had it.
Ooh.
It's always been you. We just have to remember, and that can be challenging, but that's what it's all about.
Logan, it's a good way to end this, but it just when you said that, it gives me that beautiful vision of back to childhood. So, and I don't know if I've ever thought of it as a circular journey. So thank you so much for that. I think I was thinking of it more as a ladder journey,
Yeah.
kind of like you're here on earth and a ladder back to heaven. But I love thinking of myself, and I'm sure the audience will love to think about this too, as we came as perfect beings, and in this, our spirit was perfect when we were children, and we had unconditional love and joy and imagination and creativity, and we were free, and we played and we laughed, and it's like we were perfect. The world has piled all these responsibilities on us, and we've piled them on ourselves too. And then we start to get more and more away from that child. But if we can remember that we were already born perfect, it gives us hope that we can go back to that person. Like we're just shedding layers, right? Like I always talk about clutter. It's like we're just getting rid of clutter. We're purging all the clutter to get back to our true self that is always there. Like it's almost like the perfect child's there, and we just kept putting on all the wrong outfits and piling them on layers and layers, and now we're too hot, we're taking them all off. Like, get them off, get them off, and get back to ourselves. And that to me is so much more profound and thrilling to think about. Let's just dig up through the layers and get back,
Yeah.
instead of feeling like we're doing to get somewhere. We're here inside of ourselves. We just need to purge the layers.
Yeah, exactly. It's deprogramming is what it is.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we all come into this world with some kind of programming, and viewing life as a circle or as a spiral instead of as an uphill climb creates an even deeper sense of liberation, because that's where the play, that's where the fun, that's where just like this sense of relief comes in. And life is a dance. It's not some kind of achievement or some kind of whatever to be earned. And I keep saying that over and over and over again, because I'm speaking to myself, and the way we reprogram our subconscious minds is through repetition. And so that's why I say all these things so much, is because I need to hear it more than anyone,
Yeah.
because I tend to be super serious and I get so into the melodrama of everything I'm experiencing. And then
Mhm.
when we just, like you keep saying, the more we return back to that original innocence, that childlike state of awareness, um, there's, yeah, it's just it's a brand new way of being, but it's actually not new. It may be new to us in this particular lifetime, but
Yeah. It's
it's
pretty
it's
old
always
to
it's
us.
always been within us. It's always been hidden within us. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for, I love our conversations. I love your insight. I love your wisdom. I love your outlook on the world. I feel like you're always learning, and I love when you share with us the new levels of your learning. So thank you so much for being on
Yeah.
the show again. Thank you for all the work you're doing in the world.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me back on. It's been great. I think this conversation was even better than the first one. So I think the listeners are really gonna appreciate that. Um, and like I said, yeah, it's this is a journey of never thinking you have it all figured out, staying open-minded, staying curious, constantly embracing that childlike sense of awe and wonder. And I think if we can maintain that state of being, we'll be amazed at the kingdom of heaven that just starts to pour out of our lives, around us, and in the lives of others. And that's really, I think, what we all want to experience. So keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely.
You've been a great voice. And I know that I think the listeners are really going to appreciate this episode.
Me too. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody listening. We would love your feedback on this episode, and we hope that it serves you, and we hope that you focus on being more than doing this year.
Cool.
So until next time, bye bye.
See ya.